On this episode, the hidden opportunity when someone says, "It doesn't make sense." Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. And welcome back to another That's Like WSUD episode, where we take a concept or an idea that we've read about or heard about in a book or a podcast and relate it back to water-sensitive urban design so that we can learn from it. And in today's episode, we are going to be looking at a concept that I first heard on an episode of the Tim Ferriss Show podcast. And this was, I suppose, this idea was told by a fellow called Adam Robinson, who essentially, he advises on a global scale hedge funds. And whatever you think of, investing in hedge funds and the like, I found this particular statement really useful. So what he said was that when he hears these words, and I'll tell you what these words are in a second, when he hears these words, he finds this something to always be a sign of something really powerful, and specifically a sign of opportunity in his words. But in water-sensitive urban design, maybe it's not opportunity, but maybe it's a signal for something else. And the words are, "That doesn't make sense." And he describes it like that, kind of like I did. When you hear it, you automatically kind of squint and like confused looking for it. It's like, that doesn't make sense. And the way Adam describes this is that when you hear someone say that, so imagine that we'll put this in a water-sensitive urban design context now. We know that water-sensitive urban design can work because there are lots of high-profile sites where good outcomes have been made. There are also a reasonable number of low-profile sites where good outcomes have occurred from water-sensitive urban design. But there are plenty of low-profile sites with bad water-sensitive urban design outcomes. In spite of the fact that the people involved were really smart and talented engineers and architects and the like, in spite of the fact that all these things that should have made it work were lined up, and then you hear someone come along and go, "Why couldn't they get it right? It just doesn't make sense. They had all the skills, they had this, they had that." And the way Adam describes this is that when you hear someone say that in that context, what that actually means is that the person who's saying it, whether you're saying it yourself or whether you've heard someone else say it, because we all say it ourselves sometimes, what that's actually a sign of is that that person, whether it's me or it's you or it's someone else, their mental model of how the world should work is flawed. So when they're looking at this situation and looking at this site where it should have been designed right, but it just wasn't, and they're going, "I don't understand, it doesn't make sense." What that's saying is they've got a heap of logical reasons where they should have got it right for this reason and this reason and this reason, but they didn't. Why? Well, it means their model's wrong and there's some other reason ticking around in the background. So in Adam's world of investing, he talks about another investor who essentially just spends his life looking for other people who say that doesn't make sense, and then he bets against them, essentially. But in water-sensitive urban design, the way we can take this is to go, if our goal, as my goal is to get us to a point where we have a sustainable water-sensitive city, then we need to recognize that at one point in time we had nothing water-sensitive. We've started implementing water-sensitive urban design and water-sensitive practices, but we're not at the end point yet. And that means we need to make change over time. And that implies that there's things about our current practice that are wrong. So we can use this concept of when we hear the word, "That doesn't make sense," we can use that as a trigger to try and identify where we need to focus our actions to get better outcomes. So if someone says to me, I don't get it, why those sites aren't getting good outcomes, that doesn't make sense. That says to me, okay, we need to delve deeper into this and find out what the fundamental underlying causes are here, because maybe it's a case that stormwater management plans don't attract large amounts of money for them to be done on these small sites, so the engineers can't go and spend large amounts of time working on them, so can't get good outcomes, perhaps. Equally, it might be that the way our stormwater objectives are set up is to actually incentivize bad outcomes. Maybe it's the fact that because there's no money involved in small stormwater management plans, that the youngest, least experienced person on the project gets put on it. It could be any of these reasons that fit together. But the point is that when we hear the words, but that doesn't make sense, that should be a trigger for us to go, okay, we need to dig deeper here. We need to figure out what the fundamental underlying problem is, the fundamental underlying causes, not the surface ones that we think should be explaining it but aren't. We can recognize all of those and go, maybe they're part of it, maybe they're not, but let's find the other reasons and then identify those particular reasons, and then that's where we might choose to focus our attention. Now the thing is, with water sensitive design, there's probably like a dozen things that you could, if you looked at the whole of this and then, you know, looked in detail, you'd probably find there's a dozen things where you want to go, that doesn't make sense. So then there's going to need to be some prioritization. But the point is, we can use this concept to identify the places where we could focus, and then we need to figure out some way to prioritize from there. But that's probably a whole nother story. So, what do you think of that concept? Does that make sense? I couldn't help myself. What do you think of it? I'm really curious to know. Leave us a comment below in YouTube or Facebook. We hope you found that useful, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.